welcome to the latest episode of the Skiffy and Fanny Show's At the Movies.
That's anti-American not to have seen It's a Wonderful Life.
I'm Shaun.
I'm Daniel.
And on today's show, we're discussing the horror movie Our Happy Place, first released in festivals in 2024, getting a broader release now. Written and directed by Paul Bickel, it stars Paul Bickel in a relatively smaller role, and his wife, Raya Miles, and was primarily filmed at their own cabin in Big Bear Lake, California, during the why'd you write SARS-CoV-2? COVID-19 pandemic lockdown. Yes, scientist.
I'm being accurate.
You're being accurate. Also starring Tracy Toms and Eugene Bird. Our Happy Place just had its international premiere on June 20th at the Rain Dance Film Festival in London, and we were able to watch a screener of the movie through Strike Media, who were kind enough to send us a screener. So thank you very much, Strike Media. We appreciate that. Hopefully you'll be able to see it soon. I have been told that the internet embargo on reviews has already ended, so you may see more buzz about this around the time that we're talking about it.
Yeah. So before we get into our discussion of the movie, a reminder to our listeners to please share your questions and your comments with us at skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions. If you aren't already, join us on Twitch for Shaun's Alphabet streams every Friday at 7 p.m. Central to be a part of our interactive live streaming show format. Finally, be sure to review and spread the word about our show. Help support us through our Patreon. Only takes $1 a month, U.S. currency, to be part of our Torture Cinema polls, live watching, and other special Patreon-only events that we have on Discord.
All right, Daniel, it's time. Give us a brief summary about Our Happy Place.
Yeah, so Raya, the name of the characters, the two main characters, is actually the name of the actor and actress playing them. So they just use their real names, and I'll mention why later, hopefully. But so Raya is a lonely woman who's caring for her bedridden husband, Paul. But she's being haunted by these terrifying nightmares that are recurring, and she wakes up from them each morning in the forest outside of their cabin at sort of variable places. But each time she finds herself falling deeper and deeper into freshly dug graves with the shovel that she apparently brought with her to dig without her remembering it. She begins noticing weird things and hallucinating weird things occurring to her, which may or may not be supernatural forces tormenting her. As the line between reality and this nightmare kind of collapses, and she ultimately unearths this horrifying secret buried within the woods and within herself.
All right. Yeah, so this is a psychological horror film. I think it would be
correct, with a few jump scares here and there.
Question mark. They're jump scares of a sort. Yeah. I guess. Yeah. You're right. There are a few moments of almost like supernatural jump scary moments. Although I call it psychological because I think one of the questions in this film is what is happening a literal haunting? And we won't answer that question because I think the ending of the film offers an answer, so we won't do that at this stage because spoilers. But much of the film, I think, is just really playing around with what is and isn't real, which I found very interesting, especially once we start to think that we get answers to what's going on, because as soon as you think you get an answer, the film decides to sort of 180 you a little bit and go, but it's not quite that. It's a little differently. And so you're not 100% sure what is the main character really experiencing, what is real and what's not. And I think that is probably the most interesting part of this for me, is I think they does a really good job of building that tension.
Yeah, there's a lot of, as you say, tension from that ambiguity.
Yeah.
And as I watched it, our discussion of this, we're going to, I assume, pretty much avoid spoilers, given people haven't had a chance to see it yet. They'll see it, hopefully in the future. but we're going to have to talk about things in the most general kind of way that we can without majorly spoiling something, right? But ultimately, I agree. The film is ambiguous in what interpretation you take. I've read a lot of reviews. I actually listened to an interview with the filmmakers as well. And a lot of people sort of make an assumption that this is what the conclusion of the movie, what it is. I am much more, and we can talk later of how you feel, Shaun, but I'm much more of the opinion that so much of this is an unreliable narrator that we don't really know what, if anything, of this is real or not. And there's certain things you can go and say, okay, this is the twist that really explains what's going on here. But then, oh no, there's this twist or this element that doesn't, some of them answer questions or foreshadowing that happened earlier in the movie, but never really completely, I would say. And so I agree what I liked about this, at least one of the things I like largely about this, is that ambiguity, that it really leaves it. It's a smart movie in the sense that it trusts the viewers to pay attention to things and draw their own conclusion. And you start trying to guess what's going on, and then there's a twist. And some reviewers were like, "Oh, I saw the twist coming. It was predictable." And I disagree. I don't know as the twist is something you can 100% say with certainty that that's the correct interpretation of reality, because so much of this movie is about reality utterly disintegrating and becoming fractured.
Yeah, I think if you come to this and you think that you've got an answer about what the twist is, by the end of it, if you're paying attention, what you think the twist was, which, in my opinion, what the initial twist was, and I'm being super cagey because we're trying not to spoil, but like, I kind of saw it coming. I was like, oh, there's one of two things that's happening. Somebody is bad, being cagey. And it's just which one of them is the one that's the bad one that has secrets, right? Once that reveal happens, you can't at that point go, okay, so everything that's happened before this, these must be confirmed, because so many of the clues that we get are taking place in sequences that feel like nightmares and dreams, and are also from somebody we know for a fact, as this film goes on, has an increasingly questionable relationship to sleep. And if you know anything about sleep, if you don't get good enough sleep for many, many, many days, let alone lackluster and poor sleep over the course of potentially months, which is possibly the timeline, ? I'm not sure. Right? You can't, you're right, you can't actually rely on the film's narration, or at least what the film's point of view seems to be, because I think by the end of this should become clear that whatever you thought were the firmly founded answers, the answers where it's like, this is black and white, here's the answer, done, none of that is really holds towards the end. I honestly, that is my favorite part of this film, is literally the first scene of this film is she wakes up in the middle of the woods. And she's injured.
Her foot is
dirty,
injured, and
and she has no idea. And she's really deep in, right? I mean, she's like probably a couple miles at least from her home, and she has to walk home with no shoes, nothing, with no idea how she got there. And that element happens repeatedly, where she keeps waking up in these other places, unclear how she got there. And I thought that was so fascinating, because by deliberately not giving us firm, clear, obvious answers, having the main character literally go, so that's the answer, and now I know the truth. Let me go talk to somebody and like give you the answer. By not doing that, I found that this film gave us so much more visual candy to play with, because now I want to go back and like rewatch the little pieces. I want to see like, what were the clues I missed? Right? Maybe like, is there a possible answer to this? What does the ending mean compared to all the other things? There's just this is a film that I find interesting because it gives us lots to talk about. We could go back and forth on this.
It's kind of like light, right? It's like a wave and it's a particle at the same time. It's something that could have a very normal explanation in reality, or it could have supernatural explanations, right? And,
how would you know?
Or it could be both. It could be both simultaneously, and until you look at it and look at clues, it can go one way or the other.
Right, because if
depending
it's
on
a
your
haunting,
mood for the day or something.
Yeah, right. Like if you take the haunting interpretation, she is slowly losing her mind because she's being haunted, and it's tearing her mind apart. Partly also through lack of sleep. Right. If you take the pure medical perspective, I mean, she's isolated in a mountain cabin with, unfortunately, a husband. She doesn't have any conversations with people except her friend via like a
Zoom,
Google call, Facebook, FaceTime, or whatever it is. Right. If you take that perspective, then she's going through a psychotic episode as a consequence of lack of sleep, which could be true also and gives you a very specific interpretation. I just don't know that. I think the ending makes it very, very clear that you can go either direction, and neither one is either truly the most accurate or the most inaccurate. Either interpretation is possible.
Right, and they're not mutually exclusive, but they're also maybe not even the whole story there, just of both of them either.
Yeah.
There might be more there. So I just found it exceptionally well done in that regard of...
Yeah, I agree.
Having all of those interpretations. And it also perfectly then encapsulates, another thing I loved about this movie is it perfectly encapsulates then that COVID quarantine experience, right? There have been a lot of COVID movies of trying to, both in the sense of films being shot during the pandemic and films dealing with themes of the pandemic. Yeah. This does both, and it's by far and away the best I've seen yet.
Well, because it doesn't talk about it. It just is.
No. Well, briefly, it's mentioned, I think, like once or twice. And when she goes to the grocery store, there's like she has the mask and there's the plastic partition up. Between, which apparently they filmed those scenes in the actual local grocery store. They went in and were like, hey, can we shoot? And he's like, yeah, I guess, whatever. And so they shot the scenes in the grocery store. And then when they went back, they wanted to shoot additional scenes, but they had taken down the partition because the pandemic was over. So they weren't able to shoot the new scenes because that partition was gone now.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, go ahead, please.
It's really this perfect, slice of film from that time period, encapsulating all the emotions and the psychology of being isolated, not being able to communicate other than remotely, going cabin crazy, stir crazy, all of those wonderful things.
I mean, you're not wrong, and of course there's an element of dealing with like long COVID, which is very clearly present here. Which again isn't a thing that the film tells us. It just uses visual cues. You have to just pay attention, and once you kind of know what's going on, thank you, by the way, Bickel. Thank you for not just like, here, let me spell it all out and give you a documentary in the middle of the film to tell you. You just use visual cues, and then if you're paying attention, you'll kind of figure it out because it's actually not that hard, but still, whatever. I just really appreciate that when a filmmaker doesn't assume that I'm stupid. Like I can take a visual cue and figure out what it means. I like that it is a COVID film, but it is one that I found very subtle. And it isn't a COVID film in the way some COVID products have been, where it's like, we need to make a big statement about the COVID thing. This is sort of part of the backdrop of the setting. And it feeds into what is going on in the story, but it isn't like this is explicitly what's happening as the consequence of COVID. It is sort of like a number of factors that are all sort of feeding into what's going on. And so I really appreciated that as well, that there's a level of subtlety in that portrayal. I also am glad you mentioned that this was filmed up in their Big Bear cabin, but it is in part semi-set in Fawnskin, which is another mountain town because the post office she goes to is Fawnskin post office.
Oh, okay.
And I'm so glad they did that, because it turns out that Fonscan is such a small town, it does not have its own delivery service. So when they mentioned you have to go pick up your
go
mail,
to the post office. Yeah,
that's a literally thing you have to do there. And so I assume because they're from that area, they probably know that. But, I don't know. I just felt really happy they got that like little detail right. This is California, by the way, up in the mountains where it's beautiful. And they get lots of snow.
Yes. Although can change, because in the one interview I listened to, they mentioned how one day they shot the scenes where she's out in the snow, and by the next day there was no snow at all.
Yeah.
And
depending where you are.
Yeah. And then the next day there was snow again. And so that fed in perfectly to sort of the craziness here, because there are scenes where one moment it seems like the dead of winter, Christmas. And the next scene, she's talking to her friend over Zoom. It's just like, it's April or March or whatever it was at that time. And she still thinks it's January or something like that.
Yeah, I think one of there are two interesting scenes in this that I think are kind of circulating around kind of what we're talking about. One of them that I think is really, really important was when you mentioned the April thing, right? This is when she has this like waking state comatose moment where she's just sort of standing around, moving around the house and seemingly not doing anything. And
was this right after she filmed herself on the camera?
And she has some sort of break of some kind. It's like she like recedes inside herself and she's no longer present. And it's unclear exactly how much time, because her friend says January, and then it's April now. But then my little question mark started happening of like, well, this is like your close friend. And if you knew your close friend was having, which she already does, your close friend is having issues with sleep, etc., and then they disappear off the map for 3 months in a cabin in the middle of nowhere during a pandemic, I feel like you would check sooner. And so
they eventually come, but it's not until after that.
But this is why I don't think the timeline's accurate. I think there's something off with the the timeline. There's something off with the timeline. But again, like everything is funneled through the point of view of Raya, right? Which
it's
means
all her
like
perception.
Her perception of what her friend says may or may not even be true. Is the conversation happening? I don't know. So that's one thing.
Because we're having flashes of the present, the past.
Yeah.
And imagine present, imagine past.
Yes.
And they're all intermixed.
And
it's
there might be a film logic. I've only watched it once, right? But there might be a visual logic there of how you distinguish. But again, this is why the film's so interesting, because now I can go back and be like, okay, well, what is the film's visual logic, if there is one? But anyway, I thought that was really interesting because it also just very clearly demonstrates to us that the idea of any kind of stable sense of time or reality is already complicated now, because we have no way to know how many of these states she's gone through, right? Where she's literally awake, but not. And she's just sort of existing in a moment. So that was one that really stood out to me. And then there's a line that she says earlier in the film than this moment, where she says to her husband, who again has long COVID and is disabled, and she basically has to take care of him because he's almost comatose, effectively. And she says to him, "I feel like you're killing me." That has a very different meaning depending on how you interpret what's going on, because there's an image earlier where she imagines her husband killing her with an axe.
And chasing her with the axe.
And chasing her, right.
Yeah.
And so that can be interpreted, we could take that very literally, because one of the images in here is of her husband literally as a killer, right? That could be literal. You are killing me in the sense that like something is going on here where I am literally being killed by you, whatever's happening. And that's what's going on. The dream state is semi-real. Or we could take that as a sort of, you're killing me because I'm trapped here. And then that feeds into your interpretations of the film, is the is it a supernatural? And so her husband's clued into some sort of supernatural thing that's going on. And so the killing is somewhat literal. She's being killed from the inside. Or is it a psychosis thing that is a consequence of her being trapped, understandably, in a remote town in the middle of nowhere with basically nobody to talk to all day long?
Right. Or she needs him, right, for companionship, for whatever. And she's yearning for him. Yeah. But he can't participate in that, which is killing her. Is another sort of interpretation of that as well.
Yeah, the image of her like cuddling with him, but he can't really move. He doesn't move. He doesn't even blink his eyes really. He's sort of just a body that exists. It's almost like she's cuddling up to like a human shaped pillow, effectively, right? And one of those scenes where she's doing that, she's just crying because she wants that connection. And when you mentioned like getting the past sequences, right, we see how loving their relationship is. It's very sweet and kind and very intimate. And to see the stark contrast between like the smiley face of Paul, where he's
fun
sweet
and playful,
they're very playful, and they're talking about all the bananas that they eat, and like I love that little scene, by the way. Great shooting of that scene, right? To a Paul that is effectively dead, right? He is not an active agent in this. I mean, you could feel her loneliness, and you really sympathize with what she's going through, because you could feel that, like, to go from that very close, intimate relationship to nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why, I mean, circling back to, that's why this is such the perfect sort of film metaphor for the COVID pandemic.
Yes.
Is the title, Our Happy Place, but it's stylized with these fractures running all through it. And here you are in a situation where you can be together. You're alone in your cabin. We often like time to get away and be with each other, right? At our happy place. Like a vacation spot where you can be together, right? That's peace. That's tranquil, being together and happy. And they have memories of that place. Whether those memories are real or not could be debated, but there's memories of that being the happy place for them. But now it's disorientation, it's pain, suffering, separation and isolation rather than coming together. And so it's become completely fractured into two to separate them, despite them being physically close together.
Yeah.
And so the metaphor of that just carries throughout this film in so many cool ways. From the very beginning, I started making notes while I was watching it, and as it began, I was like, okay, this is another sort of sparse, slow-moving horror movie, but I was really captivated by how many contrasts there are kind of showing separation. So the opening scene where she wakes up in the forest, it keeps alternating cuts between a really sort of far-out view to see the whole entire scene to very, very close up to parts of her body as she starts getting up and like the wound on her foot, etc. To back to wide to really close up. And in both ways showing that isolation in the environment and on her own in close up. And then throughout, I think it's like 5 minutes until you get dialogue in the movie.
Yeah.
But when the dialogue comes, there's long scenes of dialogue. And so it's, again, very separated. The lighting was like that. Outside, you're often in the light. Inside the house, it was very dark in general. So there's lots of these dichotomies, moments of music that give a ton of tension to things, because it's these discordant notes kind of going in the background, almost like a thrumming sound.
Yeah.
And then silence.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of that playing with things either being on or off there in different ways to kind of show that separation and isolation to go along with that metaphor.
That's really interesting, because I did notice with the music, you know, the contrast between silence and, I suppose, like the absolute opposite of silence, which is not music, but uncomfortable sound. Right?
Uncomfortable white noise. I don't know what that would be.
Yeah,
called,
I don't know what
yeah.
weird stringy bits and the creepy crawly sort of sound effects that you would expect in a horror film. And so you do get that contrast, which I noticed that the music is just huge portions of this there's no background, right? That in fact the music is less music, and with the exception of the Christmas song that we get because it's Christmas at one point, but for the most part the music is more like a sound effect. I mean, it has musicality to it, but it is still being used as an effect more than it is being used as a soundtrack, which is an interesting choice. And I suppose in horror it makes more sense than most, because already in horror we're sort of primed to think of orchestras and strings as being used more as effect instruments than just sort of raw orchestral arrangements. But normally you get that contrast, at least in my experience, you get that contrast as being between, like, if there's moments of silence, they're fairly small, but you get some sort of like normal orchestration in like a Howard Shore soundtrack, where you do get those effect things, where you get the discordant notes and the plucking and all those kinds of weird sounds. But then you get his sort of, very orchestral but kind of droning sound that you would get of like In the Silence of the Lambs would be an example.
There's melodic music usually still. It might be in a minor key. There might be chords that clash with each other, but it's in general still
music,
melodic, if not even though creepy, it's still melodic. This does amelodic, atonal stuff.
Yes,
really effectively to heighten that sense of unease, and because it's just going in the background like you're stuck all by yourself in a cabin going insane.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, because you can imagine, you're stuck in this environment where unless you make your own noise, like it's silent. This is a small mountain town. I mean, there's no traffic. There's no city sound. It's a quiet space already. And for a character who is experiencing increasing levels of psychological despair, right? That silence is just a contributing monster to that problem, because the sound we should expect here is the sound of Paul speaking, them having conversations, laughter, joy, and what we get is the opposite. This is not a joyful space anymore. It is
the sound of him trying to breathe through the oxygen mask.
Yes. Yeah, or when he has trouble breathing, right? Those are the effects that she gets from Paul, other than our memories, right? So, in a way, like I hadn't paid as much attention to, I'll be honest. I was really focused on the character work, but the fact is that the atmosphere of this film is enhancing all of this. And I think, with the exception of a couple things that I'll be critical of, where like they kind of relied on jump scare music, that in moments where I was like, but this isn't really a jump scare moment for me. With a couple of exceptions for that, mostly the music I think is being used in a brilliantly accented way that just enhances all of the sort of tones and themes of the film. They've done a good job. Like, honestly, I really like this film. It was pretty good.
So some people have, in reviews I've read, commented they were annoyed by the repetition of the film.
What?
Okay, I actually thought that was one of the highlights of it. Like, I can kind of get, like, after a while, seeing her waking up outside, maybe you're like, okay, enough of that, but it was different enough each time.
They're clues!
They're clues, and repetition is part of, like, there's repetition of seeing the shovel and the axe in random places throughout the movie. There's repetition of other things I won't mention that are relevant to the plot or to the twist. But again, that sense of droning repetition, but things are slightly off and weird, that's a hallmark of that pandemic vibe too, right? Where we were all in this life of having to repeat things because what else do we have to do during isolation? So I don't understand that critique, but
I don't
it
either.
Seems you don't either.
No. So to me, I found the first almost 2/3 of this film, very different type of film than the last third of the film, which is where the last third to me was where
that's a good point.
It felt more. Again, I'm not 100% sure it actually is supernatural, but it felt more supernatural in that last third, right? But that first 2/3 to me felt like a psychological thriller or like a psychological mystery, right? Because she keeps, the main one being, right, she keeps waking up in these places, and then there is, eventually she wakes up and it's just ground, and then that repeats, and then it's ground, but with the shovel and a little bit of the layer of the dirt's been removed, and then it's more, and then it's more. And I'm not trying to ruin the movie. I think it's very interesting. To me, I went, okay, once I saw there was a pattern, right? One of the characters literally goes, "Can you draw it on a map for me?" And that was my immediate thought was, yeah, put it on a map. Because like 100%, if I were writing the mystery novel right now, I'd have that sucker up on a thumbtack board. And I'm like, okay, where, because that's how that first 2/3 really feels. It very much feels like there is a mystery that's being unraveled.
A puzzle to figure out.
Yes. And it's just clear. I think it's clearer to, at least to me as the viewer, that that's what was going on. And that was a deliberate choice in the film. Obviously, it's not as clear to Raya for most of that run, that first 2/3, until eventually she sort of gets the idea that maybe there is something here. And obviously, we get some twists that come later that kind of complicate that mystery. But to me, like the repetition, I thought was, I don't think you can take it out. To me, the film collapses.
Yeah.
It loses all of its tension. It loses, I think, all of the character dynamic that matters, because this is a person who is going through this repeatedly. And I don't know about anyone. I've been through, so I've experienced sleep deprivation a bit, not to this level. I want to be very clear because this is pretty extreme, right? I've never like walked into the woods. But you know, when you lose so much of that rest, right? Like it really does. It's an exhausting effect on you. Your whole body gets exhausted, and to have that happen over a prolonged period of time, I mean, I could immediately begin to see why this would be exhausting. And even at moments in this film when she's waking up, she just starts coming back, and then she wakes up again, and she comes back, and it's almost becomes routine. Right, and which is a detail you notice through seeing the repetition. She's gone through like 8 cycles. Now she's just following like a routine.
And she doesn't wake up afraid anymore. It's
true.
Just she gets up and
I'm in the woods again.
Houses and let's go.
Dag Nurbit. Right.
At least I have my shoes this time.
But she's slowly unraveling. You can see her getting more and more and more tired.
And that's one of the things, I guess, you mentioned earlier. You know, Paul Bickel is the writer-director and is in it. But he doesn't have that much to do, because most of the time he's just lying there, right? He does have some scenes.
And he eats oatmeal a lot.
This is really Raya's movie, right? She is it's a one-woman show here in large regard. She talks to her friend, and her friend has a boyfriend, husband, I don't know what it was, but so they're kind of in the movie now and then, and they do a great job. But Raya is so impressive.
Agreed.
And the reason why apparently they use their real names in this is that they're not actors.
Really?
And don't have that much experience in it, I guess. And so they said if they had made up other names for themselves and started calling themselves by another name, they would have just laughed and not been able to hold it together. So they decided they had to use their real name so it would feel more natural without breaking character. And that surprises me, because Ray is fantastic in this.
I find that
the
rather
performance
surprising
is amazing.
She gives a very decent performance here. I mean, we could certainly be. I mean, look, it's an independent film. We could be like very hypercritical. I find myself not wanting to do that, because I find that with some of these independent films where they're being made by like first-time directors or who haven't really done a lot of work, right? Like I'm expecting some rough around the edges. Like I don't expect, this to be the most polished, like it's a Denis Villeneuve film, or whatever, where everything's just so perfect. So I'm kind of not that
not a
critical.
Wes Anderson. Yeah.
Or not a Wes Anderson, right? But, her performance I thought was remarkably good. And, it's not a perfect performance, but then you telling me that you're like, well, I'm not really an actress. I'm like, okay, bullcrap. I don't buy it. Because
they've mostly done short movies, is my understanding, but...
Well, I mean, I guess still, though.
So they have some experience, I guess. Maybe she did theater. I have no idea.
But this is not an easy role for anyone, because for the most part, she's alone, really, for most of this film. And I don't know about you.
Well, he was always there filming it, I guess.
Well, I mean, and that's,
because they were doing everything.
Right, in the room.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, right, this is even made more difficult by the fact that, most of her screen time is non-dialogue time. It's walking, it's experiencing, it's emotional. And I'm not a professional actor, so what the hell do I know? But I would imagine that as somebody who's not experienced as an actor or actress, tapping into those emotions would be one of the hardest things to really effectively get across. Because I don't know about you, Daniel, but like I can't easily cry on cue. I can kind of do it. I'm not gonna do it, but I can kind of do it. But I don't think I could do it like as an actor. But she cries. She has her face looks of exhaustion. She has long periods where we just have to rely on her body language and her face, and she does a really good job. So
without it making it seem like she was in a silent movie, and
right?
Acting in that kind of like over emotive faces and things like that.
Good for you. Guys, like, wow, you did this with very little experience. A+.
Yeah, this is not a perfect movie.
Sure.
But it's damn impressive for what it is, I think. Just how much of it they did on their own, all practical effects, and just using the camera. No CGI, etc. And doing most of the stuff all themselves to do that filming in the cabin, on site, on location, around the cabin in the town. And then there are scenes that have other characters in it that they filmed later, apparently. And it was only later that they could get the music guy in to be able to come in and actually put music into parts of it. So I imagine it was a very interesting way to have to make a full-length movie. But I think they do it remarkably well.
I mean, I think the thing that the scene that really cements the performances is honestly the car scene where they're talking about bananas.
Right? Which is right at the beginning. I kind of wonder if they shot that later or
It feels so natural.
Yeah.
It almost feels like they didn't script it. They were just having a conversation about how many bananas she eats.
Yeah.
Which I know, like, you hearing this and being like, a banana conversation, like, how exciting could that be? And it's like, it's not that the scene's exciting. It's just, it's the naturalness and the way that it sets up their relationship. I mean, you could see immediately the chemistry between them as they're talking about freaking bananas, right? How many bananas they eat and how it's going to be a problem if they can't get bananas on time, like, because they go through so many, right? It's the kind of dumb
sometimes I give half of my
have.
Banana to you and your oatmeal.
Yeah, right. Right. But it's the kind of dumb conversation couples have. I mean, you've done it. I know you've done it, Daniel. You've had a stupid conversation about like a banana or some ridiculous. I've done it. Right. So it felt so natural. And I think that is the moment I just went, oh, the acting's going to be pretty good in this. Like, because this feels, I just really like that sequence. So. Yeah. And you mentioned the practical effects, right? This does not rely on, a lot of very flashy effects, which honestly I think is to its benefit because the Bickel takes does some smart choices about what to shoot and what to put as a sound effect or a thing that happens off screen that someone then reacts to after the fact, which to me I think is I think is more interesting for a film that's more psychological, that we don't get an excessive amounts of like gory choices here.
Right.
Which you could do given there's lots of axe murdering
but
that happens.
There's not much. Yeah.
But you don't get a lot of gore. You get implied.
But there's some things moving around on their own.
Yeah.
There's a lot. He does a good job of making things blurry or out of focus.
Yes.
To make it seem creepy, whereas if you were shooting it if you weren't shooting it the right way, it would completely fall flat. The scene, it would no longer be creepy, right? It would no longer be startling, even.
Yeah.
So I think that's done well.
I mean, that if this is them at their first feature-length film step, this is going to be a lot like a film we watched a while ago, right? That I mean, certainly was a flawed film from a sort of narrative perspective, right? Things Will Be Different is the film I'm talking about, also from 2024, right? Where I just felt that the way it was shot was very interesting, and I could see that director, given another script and maybe given more time, even like a little bit more budget, they could really do something interesting. I think the same thing here. I mean, if I were to give a final thought on this film, it would just be that I want some studio to like hand over $1 million and have them make another film, because I would love to see what would happen, like if he can work with some more actors and bring in a little bit more of a cast, and how would he shoot some other kind of thriller? What choices would he make with a little bit more budget, but not dramatically so he can still be very creative? Because I just find overall, I could take issues with maybe kind of that back third. There's a couple little things in there that kind of happen that I think it adds too much ambiguity and too many sort of visual choices that I didn't feel like was where the story was going. It kind of felt like it was a divergence. And I'm being cagey again. That would be my main criticism, is I just felt like that back third, there's just something missing there. But overall, I really thoroughly enjoyed this. I don't know what the critics are saying, but they're wrong. So
it has good scores on IMDb. I know that, but
oh, does it? Oh, good.
Yeah, I hope they continue doing well at festivals and can find distribution too, or will have it.
So you're right, 9.3 on IMDb. So,
yeah, I didn't really say anything negative this whole time, and I don't know if I have anything that negative really to say about it, in part because even things that watching through it that I was disappointed on, I was more confused.
Sure.
And not particularly that end third. Like, I can see what you're saying, but at the same time, I really need to watch this again to be certain of things and to really firmly say, okay, that probably doesn't need to be done, or could have left that series of shots out or something like that. But
I mean, again, you could be hypercritical, but I just feel like that's just not fair to the film that we're like. If you're going into this expecting, like it better be like the greatest horror film ever made of all time. I mean, I just feel like you have to have an expectation here that's more fair to the film that has been made, which is a film that's on a shoestring budget, that's being distributed as an independent film.
That they shot in their house.
That they shot in their own house, with together, a very small cast, and yet made something that I think is very interesting and is visually very compelling and is honestly
smart.
It's a pretty smart, I mean, the IMDb people are correct. I'm 9-ish in that territory. 8-9 is honestly pretty fair.
Yeah. It's smart, but not in that sort of like, what's the word? Swarmy way.
Yeah.
Thank you. Pretentious. It's not pretentious at all.
No.
Yeah.
No, it just expects the viewer to sit down and think through them details, y'all.
So yeah, glad we got to watch this one.
Oh, 100%. Thank you, Strike Media.
And feature it on the show, because we've had a few from Strike Media that we've covered on the blog before, but I think this was a great one to feature on the podcast as well.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I'm very pleased, and I'm really glad we're getting to get a couple screeners because we get to see some stuff that honestly I don't know that if I would have heard about this otherwise.
No, I don't. I think I would have, unless it comes on Shudder at some point or something.
Yeah,
but,
fair.
There's a sci-fi coming out soon that got very excited about, but then I read in the press release that it was using some new amazing AI dubbing process.
Hard
and
pass.
So I was like, delete.
Sorry.
Because it's a foreign movie, and I was like, oh, this sounds great. The plot sounded great, and no.
No, I'm good with the
no,
dubbing.
Thanks.
AI dubbing. No, hire real voice actors.
Yes. Well, I do not like dubbing, period.
Well, fair, but if you're gonna...
I would rather just be subtitles, but if you're... Either way, whatever you're doing, yeah. Hire translators.
Yeah, well, especially with subtitles, because my kid and I realize we're going to wrap up. I'm sorry, but I have to say this. We were watching this show called Mashal on Netflix, which is like an animated show, and it has... subtitles, which I put on in English for my kid because he's still kind of working on his English, right?
Uh-huh.
But we both noticed while reading them going, those are not at all what they said in English. Like, completely different sentence structures, all of this stuff. And we were just like, okay, we should just turn the subtitles off because, like, that's just creating more confusion.
Right.
And it's sort of like, well, how did we get two different translations? Right? Where was someone needed to talk. Right? So anyway, the point is, as Configuration Queen says in chat, hire translators, please, and make it consistent, I guess, across the board.
I agree.
All right, folks. So it is time for us to wrap it up. So if you have any thoughts, if you have seen this film or our review made you want to go see it wherever it is available for you, please let us know. Go to skiffingfanty@gmail.com as the email that you can send us stuff. Or if you're on our Discord via our Patreon, you can also let us know there what you thought. A bunch of folks have been going into the show. There's a channel for talking about show stuff, and so people have been telling us about things that they reacted to episodes, so please do. So we're on Blue Sky, Threads, Mastodon, YouTube, a whole bunch of other social sites. So if you'd like to find those, skiffingfanty.com/skiffythings. And then remember, every Friday, 7 p.m. Central, we are live on Twitch at twitch.tv/alphabetstreams for whatever show we happen to be doing that particular Friday. So enjoy. We've got, I think, a string of interviews coming up before the next Torture Cinema. So expect those. And then again, if you like what we do, the best thing to do would be to go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. $1 is all it takes. And if you give us $1, it'll help us pay for all the bills that we just got because we got hacked by malware garbage and had to deal with that. So yeah, support the show because it costs money. Speaking of Patreon supporters, we've got a bunch, and I'm going to say some of them, and Daniel's going to say some of them. Thank you very much to Andrea the Alluring, Cameron the Chthonic, I can't say that word, Caroline the Benevolent, Carrie the Divine, Chris the Candescent, Dan the Transient, Daniel the Culture, David the Debonair, JC the Jocular, Jeff the Gracious, Joseph the Jovial, Juan the Junctional, KB the Kind, Karen the Kickass.
Kat the Kinematic, Matthew the Magnificent, Paul the Pious, Phoebe the Eloquent, Robin the Bold, Ryan the Resilient, Sarah A. the Sensational, Sarah E. the Sublime, Sarah O. the Rapturous, Scott the Gentleman, Stephen the Strange, Tari the Thorough, Tanya the Triumphant, Trish the Imperturbable, and Victor the Valiant.
Perfect. So you can find me, ShaunDuke.net. All my socials are ShaunDuke.net/DukeThings. And then I am also here at Alphabet Streams every Wednesday and Sunday at 6 p.m. Central for video games and other kinds of things.
You can find me, Daniel, at Reading 1000 Lives, my website, or on the Skiffy and Fanty blog, and I'm on Blue Sky.
He is, in fact, on Blue Sky. He's also on a lot of other places, but I guess you're mostly active on the Blue Skies.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Well, as required by the Skiffy and Fanty bylaws, I need to make this happy. And so I'm happy to report that Daniel has agreed to spend 2 straight years with me in a remote cabin in the Sierra Nevada mountains, where we will be starting a brand new series of podcasts financed by someone who we haven't figured out yet, where we'll just do a whole series of stuff on whatever we feel like doing, starting with Degrassi: The Next Generation.
Ranking them all.
Ranking them all in order.
In order of joy.
Every episode across like 6 seasons. And on that note, happy ending and scene.